pianists, teachers, colleagues, and friends. Today we're talking about how to teach the first movement of Mozart's Sonata in B-flat major, K.570. It sounds like this. If we haven't met before, my name is Jana Williamson and welcome to my home studio in the suburbs of Chicago. I had a request from a YouTube viewer for more Mozart, and I love Mozart, so this was not a difficult one to comply with. I'm actually preparing a presentation this week in which I include playing part of this sonata, so I thought, what a perfect time to talk about this piece on the YouTube channel. I have taught this sonata to high school students, and I love this piece. It's more difficult than the C major K.545, which I do have a video on, but I think it's still within the realm of student piece, or at least on the easier level of Mozart sonatas, which truthfully there's no easy Mozart. I will put this in line with K.283, the G major, which I also love teaching. So if you have questions about Mozart or other Mozart pieces you'd like me to cover, let me know. I do already have a video on K.545 first movement and one of his easy minuets. I'm looking at this today in my Henley Urtext. You can purchase both the whole volume, volume 2, which includes the later K numbers, or you can purchase this piece as a standalone, just this sonata from Henley. And this is not included in many student anthologies or series because we are at this early advanced level. So this is the level at which students should be purchasing good quality editions, either Urtext or student editions that are more heavily edited but intended to help students play this well, still with good editing. So if you have questions about editions, go ahead and check out the links that I'll put in the description of this video. But also, it's just important to think that students at this level are buying good quality editions of their music so that later on, if they want to come back and revisit these pieces or learn other sonatas or other pieces in the book, they have a really good resource there already. So our students coming in to approach a piece like this should already have quite a bit of experience with classical style at the intermediate and upper intermediate level. They should have already played several sonatinas as well as easier sonata movements, things like some of the easiest Haydn, perhaps something like Beethoven Opus 49 number 2, G major. They also need to be comfortable in B flat, which frankly is not the most comfortable key on the piano. I always get a kick out of my students who are in band because for wind and brass students, B flat major is, their home base. That's where they spend so much of their time. But because of the arrangement of white and black keys on the keyboard for this key, it's not always the most comfortable. I actually do think this movement in particular lays very well in the hands, but it's just worth noting they should be practicing B flat major scales and arpeggios to, kind of be swimming in that key and feeling comfortable with the arrangement on the piano. Of course, we spend a lot of time in F major in this piece, as well as E flat major. The second theme is in E flat major on, the first page of this piece. So lots of flats. There's also several accidentals in this piece. It's highly chromatic, a lot of half steps, a lot of chromatic movement, and really adventurous chords. This is late Mozart. And for anyone who thinks that Mozart is boring harmonically, I would just love for you to come play this piece and think about all the keys that he takes us through. This is beautifully crafted with a lot of accidentals. So students do have to play accurately. There is no getting around playing accurately in Mozart. It's so exposed. I always tell my students that playing Mozart feels like you're naked on stage because everything is just, you can hear everything and it's all exposed out there. Train your students to learn accurately and to use practice techniques that encourage them to be reliably accurate, such as playing a number of repetitions of a small portion in a row accurately. Don't let them pedal through this piece. You can use little bits of pedal, but They should never be, holding the pedal down through whole groups of 16th notes, because that's just a coping mechanism for feeling like you're not playing accurately. So they do have to practice slowly, practice without the pedal, really dig into playing accurately. All right, the main thing I want to talk about in this is ease of technique. There are several scale passages as well as several opportunities for rotation technique. And I am not a Taubman expert, but I do find that rotation is probably the easiest way to play many of the things in this piece at a fast speed with a light, beautiful tone that's called for in this style. So let's start with rotation. You get a lot of these things like the broken intervals at measure 35 and on. That's so much easier to play if you're just set up for where the interval will be and then you rotate back and forth. If I play that faster, I think you can see little tiny micro rotations that allow me to just play very lightly. And that ending of that section right there, measure 39, is why we practice 4-note chords. My students learn how to do the 4-note inversions. That's just part of their technical regimen for whatever key they're working on for the day. And then once they see them, they're like, oh, that's easy. I can, just do, go through those very quickly. That rotation shows up again in places like 57, 58, 59, as well as in the left hand. Anytime you have these Alberti patterns, that was measure 63 or measure 67. All of that is going to work better if you can kind of generally be resting on top of the keys and then let it almost kind of shake out back and forth. So block through the chord so you're very secure on it, and then just little tiny bits of doing this, not individual finger movement. So again, hopefully students at this point are acquainted with rotation. They've already used it in something else, and you're applying it here to get that shimmery, light, delicate sound that we want for a lot of these 16th notes. We're hoping to avoid heavy, pedantic 16th notes and instead feeling in larger groups. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So it has that, pulse, larger pulse, and then ultimately longer phrase that you're going for. Another opportunity for rotation is in the right hand with the long trills. So we have a trill on G at measure 68. I like to, whenever I can, try finger 3 and 1 for trills because it just makes it so much easier to use that opposable thumb. You can rotate with 3 and 2. It works, but for students who are learning faster, longer trills, they're earlier in that journey, try to make it as big of an opportunity for rotation as possible. So 3-1 allows for more opposition and then therefore more ability to rotate and go back and forth. Of course, there are also just plain old scale patterns in this as well as broken chords. We get the little scales at the end of the exposition here. I do have a resource called 7 Ways to Make Your Scales Great, which has 7 general practice techniques with some sub-techniques within there that if your student is struggling to get their scales nice and clean and clear, some of those practice techniques might really help on a piece like this. Check the link in the description of this video to download that free resource. Moving on from the clean and clear technique or ease of technique, let's talk briefly about articulation. Mozart is most beloved as a composer of opera. He understood the human voice very well. My husband is a singer and he's sung a lot of choral Mozart, and he always tells me that Mozart is very easy on the voice. We think of him as that. We think of him as being a piano composer because of the piano concerti as well as the sonatas and many other things, and it feels so nice on the hands, on the keyboard. But the other thing that I think Mozart wrote so well for was string instruments, particularly the violin. And when I look at the slurs at the beginning of this piece, I find them to be a little bit confusing as a pianist, because I'm thinking that, are those supposed to be 2-note slurs, like down, up, down? really sound right. And so instead, I think of those as bow markings. So if you or your student are not familiar with how string music is written, the slurs are used to tell you if you are connecting your bow across notes or if you're gonna do one bow direction on every single note. So I train my students to think of those as just how a violin would play one bow, one bow, one bow, one. And we think of that as a larger phrase that's ultimately connected. It might be worth playing a little bit of violin Mozart for your students. There's many sonatas. And in fact, I learned on preparing this video that there is an apocryphal violin part to this sonata. It's the exact same piano part, and then someone added a violin solo part on top of it. Originally, it was thought to be by Mozart, but it seems like that's probably not true. I couldn't find a recording of it, but it would be very interesting to hear that. So if you can find a recording of it, leave it in the comments. I would love to hear it. So helping your student understand those small groupings that then lead to larger groupings. Mozart must be phrased beautifully. And I do think that's one of the things that makes Mozart a little bit esoteric. I could honestly play Mozart all day. There's something very natural for people who have spent their entire lives, like me, making music and being absorbed in music, that it's almost like it's this natural thing that comes out. Our students do need a little bit more training if they have not spent as much time in music, and particularly if they haven't listened to as much Mozart and classical style. So that's one other tip I would give, is lots of listening at this level, and perhaps even movement or conducting or general kind of absorbing how these phrases are shaped. And once again, to go back to technique, the technical problems have to be solved before you can really have that ease in which to then play beautifully, effervescently, and lightly for so much of this. Lastly, I just want to say that this development is one of my favorite. There are so many amazing movements through harmony, which I kind of already mentioned. But this is a great opportunity to engage your students' imagination and just kind of think about what's happening. So much of this piece is more contrapuntal. And so I mentioned that students at this point should have experienced several sonatinas and easier sonatas, but I actually think it's also super important for students who have played a decent amount of Bach and Baroque music when they get here. If you think about measure 101, where your left hand takes the main theme, your right hand is doing that little imitative thing at the top, and it becomes very, very conversational. That's after you've had all this, odyssey through all these keys. So if I just play a little bit of the end of the exposition, and then that shocking chord that starts the development, and then we end up in D flat major. Does not belong in the key of B flat, of course. So we can just listen to a little bit of the harmonic movement, and I would encourage your students to really absorb what's happening, think about which chords sound particularly unusual or unexpected, and write a story, or at least have some idea of character of what's happening through this development. The development in sonata form is where the drama, the conflict, takes place. After we've introduced the characters in the exposition, we have that drama, and then we have the recapitulation, which is the resolution of that conflict. So I'll just play a little bit of this to finish us off. That gives you a few ideas and teaching tips on this lovely Mozart sonata movement. Don't forget to check out all the links in the description, such as my 7 ways to make your scale sound great, as well as links to the additions that I have talked about today. I wish you all the best in your teaching and playing.